Hosmer. Dogs are messing with a cat. Oh, shoot. Glenfield 60. I have to go out squirrel hunting with that thing. I haven't squirrel hunted with that in years. It's heavy. Got other 22s that are a lot lighter. But that one's a multi-shot. I've got a single shot Glenfield 10 in there. Real nice. Anyway, when I get through with this one, I'm going to mark on the title and such about dispelling valve seat fallacies, in a sense. But I want to cover the general procedures. When I get a head in, I'll be able to show it to you. But for the most part now, I want you to envision a valve seat. Okay? Got a big ring. Put a 45 degree on it most of the time, not all the time. A 37.5 for 7.3s. Power strokes. What was the other one? No, prior to the power stroke even. 30s, 45s, they're the common ones, period. Every once in a while I have run into some that were supposed to be 20. They were odd. The 37.5, that was an oddball. Nobody's even sure why they did it. Well, I had one of them. I didn't have a 37.5. So, oops. Made it work. Worked well. But now, guys, when I started back in 90, what was it, 94, I think, 93, 94, somewhere in there, I started with the idea opening up a machine shop of some sort. Just simple stuff, because I was frustrated. I found out later on the machine shop everybody's going to over the hill, they stopped going to. They're going to Syracuse or Utica, and that's from Sharon Springs. That was a haul, but they did it anyway. And the biggest point was that when they got done, you'd still hear the valves wisping. I find out the seat cutters were dull. The old man wouldn't replace them, and the kids were turning the seat cutters with a T-handle by hand. I just sat there stunned. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. What? Yeah, why do you think we're so cheap? They had hot tanks and rotary broach, and he sat there one day setting up a rotary broach and just got fed up, so a head would go across it. Do you hear tick 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 tick? Yeah. Here's the worst of it. You can sharpen the little bits that were in the rotary broach, Van Norman. And the worst is, you could purchase a stone, like a whetstone, just a knife sharpener, very fine or medium, any one of them, and you could have finished the cutter off and measured it. It's so hard to get those little things. You could have finished it, man. But no, I go in there sometimes. Tick, tick, tick. Huh? I said, well, how do you set the thing up? So what do you mean? There's a flat table in the back. Whatever you're putting on there, you drop it on the table, clamp it, and run it across the broach. What? Yeah. And then cut off what you want and you're done. Okay. I mean, for the average stuff that was going on, that was okay too, but they were pretty rough. There was one or two heads that I finished off hand sanded myself. That was pretty ugly. Well, diesels didn't really care, the farm tractor diesels. There wasn't much turbocharged at the time. The fact is, the new tractors are just coming into turbocharging. Probably half of them were to 3/4. And so I got frustrated and started buying some of my own stuff to do small engine with anyway. And then finally just said, I'm getting into it. Found a way to get into it. That was ugly with the ex-wife. But one of the things that people kept asking me consistently, all the time, every time, is, do you do a 3-angle valve job? What do you mean? Well, do you do a 3-angle valve job? I said, if you want it, I can do it. Why would you want it? What do you mean? Every valve job, you do a 3-angle valve job. No. Oh, you do a 5? No. What do you mean? 2. What are you talking about, 2? I said, most of my work is farm tractors. Diesels. Most of the diesels have valve seat inserts. What's that got to do with it? The inside diameter of that circle, that little valve seat, on almost every tractor ever manufactured with an insert, the inside diameter is the lower edge of the valve face seat. You don't need a 3-angle valve job in most cases. A vast majority of the cases. Unless you do what some guys do, they'll throw in a seat that has too small an internal diameter because they have one. Well, now you have to do a 3-angle valve job. You can't put that in there. Sure you can. And a lot of the lower speed diesels, if it's an eighth of an inch smaller in diameter, on the intake in particular, but exhaust as well, that's a lot. But it's a 16th on either side. What's a 16th translate into? About 60 thousandths. 62, 2.5, somewhere in there. And it's like a 32nd is 31 thousandths. So there's a fair amount of meat there, but it's not crucial. In fact, part of the 3-angle valve job, if you have something in the neighborhood of 70 or 80, you can bore down through there to open that hole up. So there are some guys that'll do that. I've done it a few times when it was necessary. But the only other time you cut the 3-angle valve job is if you put in a bigger valve. You have to bore down in the seat. And on a diesel, it's ridiculous. You have to redo the whole 9 yards. So it's not happening for performance even, unless you're taking a lot of time and a lot of gamble. But the 3-angle valve job that people talked about as a performance valve job, on cast heads with cast-in seats, even induction hardened, a 3-angle valve job is often standard fare on a valve job. Why? Because the hole in there might not even be concentric at the bottom. You heard me. Because of the port, and if you go too deep down in there, you'll end up getting into the... And you can do a 3-angle valve job, and on a lot of the old gas tractors, or 350 Chevys from way back, some of the Ford heads, they'd have induction hardened seats for the exhaust. And the intake, you could bury it right down in there pretty good before you had to put a seat in there. Then you would do a 3-angle valve job to clean up that offset hole that's in there. Well, now your seat's coming up towards the edge of the valve. Now, in the intake, it's not a problem. But, and there have been times, very few, where I cut the valve seat where the minimum width was the accuracy they wanted, say 50, 60 thousandths wide seat, 70, 80, whatever it was supposed to be. And then there might be lower spots all the way around. But if it's going to start a disaster, just make sure that the top edge of the actual seat is where it belongs on the valve. It'll take care of itself from there. You say, well, it's not going to... Oh, excuse me. Got an itch. It's not going to be something that you're plowing ground with. It's something that somebody just runs a wagon back and forth, an antique tractor, that kind of thing. Don't tell me it doesn't work fine and that it's wrong. It's not factory. It's not perfect spec. But for some guys that want something done quick, fast, and let me throw it back on, it does very well. It doesn't care that the lower edge of the seat is down here further than over here. Yes, in time, it'll start pushing things. So it's not a good thing to do. But until that thin side wears off dramatically, it's not going to cause a problem at all, especially on an intake. It's just not going to be a problem unless you overheat it for a long period of time. On the exhaust, no, that's bad. So on the exhaust, it doesn't happen. But just if you can do the 3-angle valve job in those instances and still keep the seat on the valve, you're talking pretty much only an intake. You can do the 3-angle valve job as a standard fare. But with valve seat inserts, the center hole of every insert, top to bottom, okay, is the lower part of your valve seat in the majority of the cases. So if somebody says, "Are you doing a 3-angle valve job, man?" That's for performance. It'll run better if you do. Why don't you tell me it gets a 3/4 race cam too? Yeah, it has no meaning. Today's performance valve jobs, on a lot of them, to match what they're doing in the porting, they might have 5 angles, 4, 5, 6 angles, whatever they want to do. The valve face itself, they're starting to put 5 angles on them. I don't know how you're going to do that, or to be honest, even why, but they do and seem to have performance gains that they can find on the dyno. Does it translate on the track? No, I don't think it does. Listen to me carefully before you go blowing your mouth off like a Karen or a Ken. You make a 5% change twice, you have a 10% change. Now it makes a difference. And when they're racing, it's kind of what they're looking for. But they're balancing, especially some of the circle track racing, are balancing between putting out 1,000 horsepower and being alive at the end of the night, and maybe halfway through the season or the entire season before they go down. That changes things dramatically. Acceleration, etc., etc., etc. And I don't mean just accelerating, you put the hammer down and watch it accelerate. No, I mean acceleration as you start to put it down. The engine follows you up and comes back, and follows you up and comes back as you need. Not barking, not choking, not snuffing the fire out. Yes, it can. That cold air and fuel intake going in there too fast, and the vacuum drops. Now it doesn't mix well behind it, and you can have blow the flame out and starve the engine at the same time. Diesels in particular. The fire-breathing dragon, but if you don't have enough heat in that cylinder, when you start to spool that thing up, that'll blow the fire right out. It's crazy, but it will. So that's one of the things I wanted to dispel. The 5-angle valve face, please. If you're really, I've done it before, make a back cut by request. And I've done it also before when it would work and it would fit. You got a valve that's almost a knife edge. Run a 90 on it. Clean it up. Make a margin. If you can get the valve seat to catch, you're golden. Somebody has an antique that's moving. So there's some things you can do that others, that's not right, that's sketchy, you can call it whatever you want. When I assembled it, it worked. So I was also told that you have to bore something out to 3 to 5 thousandths undersized still, and then hone it 5 thousandths, 3 to 5 thousandths. I tried 3 on a couple of V8s. Not with what I was doing, because I had to hone by hand. Somebody said, that's inaccurate. Well, when you don't have $200,000 to buy a nice little automatic honing, no, it's not. Besides that, it was easy to make adjustments. Ridiculously easy. Why? A little sanding board. You take the stones and measure. When they're out of spec, you take the sanding board, clean it down, measure it again. Run it in the bore and make sure it isn't wobbling. It's not wobbling. You got your stone set. Well, let's say the bottom, it's hourglass. You can't keep it at the bottom long enough, or haven't been, trying to run your crosshatch. Well, you can either clean the stones off so they'll take care of the problem, or you just stay at the bottom longer. It's hard to stay at the bottom longer unless that's severely tapered, because the thing will expand back out where it's wider. Then you get into the bottom and where it's, so sometimes you have to take the little stone and find out where it's critical and take off some of the stone, a thousandths or so, and then finish honing, and then check it up and down and measure it. You got a nice straight bore. If you're fortunate, I got tired of fumbling around like that. You know what I did? Finally told somebody one time I'd bore it dirt cheap, which was still $10 too cheap, I found out later. I bore a hole with a Van Norman clone boring bar. It was cloned of a 777S Van Norman boring bar. I think it was a PK447, something like that. And when I bored the hole, I bring it out to spec, exact spec range. But each hole, the tool bit was sharpened for each hole and each of the last two cuts. And I'd bring it to bore size and run a dingleberry up and down in there to clean off the highs and lows and the extra chips and anything else that might fracture, break off, or cause a problem, and bring it to a nice crosshatch with a nice smooth bore. And I did that probably a dozen times with fantastic results. You wouldn't think it was possible. But the Van Norman bar, when you put it through with a nice brand new, and your last cut might be 5 thousandths, smooth all the way down through. Then you take that dingleberry and put in a crosshatch, you've actually roughened it up compared to what that boring bar did. Low speed. It was beautiful. So you can fumble around all you want with your hones. Is it better? Is it more accurate? I don't know if it's more accurate. Is it general? It's considered better because the honing process takes off metal that was fractured by the boring bar having a hard tool bit go across it. I guess there's something to it, but I haven't found it yet. So anyway, that's another myth I'd like to dispel. What's it? Yeah, that's about it for now. There's not too many other weird myths that you have to cover, except, well, one. If you're using a piston that's called hypereutectic, do a double take, and if you have to, call the manufacturer, not even necessarily your supplier. Silverlight's the most common one to supply them. They used to be. They made the Keith Black piston. But I think the other manufacturers are making hypereutectic. It's a standard piston with more than average silicon in it. Actual silicon nodules acts almost like wear of cast iron, much more forgiving. But it's in there to insulate the head of the piston. So the heat gets into the head of the piston and that swells, and the piston rings are right there. The top ring in particular can expand in drag racing under full wild load. They've had some of them expand up to 60 thousandths. So, excuse me. That is one of the things I wanted to cover as well. Hypereutectic pistons, you need to open up your ring end gap. I think they said normal is, 4 thousandths for every inch of bore. So if you have 4 inch, it's 16 thousandths. And that would make sense, 12 thousandths for 3 inch. So that's a ballpark figure. But get your actual spec and then open it up 10 to 25% as your starting point. And never overheat your engine. Woo! So that's another myth to dispel there. Oh, there's some others I'll have to come up with later on the bearings and the cams, but we'll stop there for now. Pop's got to go check his stew meat. Peace and long life.